The low rumble of Officer Mike Thompson's patrol car was the only sound breaking through the autumn night's silence in the sleepy town of Cedar Grove. His usual route took him past Johnson Creek Bridge, a weathered structure that had seen better days. The clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and the harvest moon cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Mike's thoughts drifted to Rex, his canine partner of 7 years, who had succumbed to cancer just 3 months ago. The empty passenger seat still felt wrong, the absence of Rex's steady breathing and occasional tail thumps against the leather leaving an emptiness that seemed to grow with each passing shift. As he approached the bridge, something made him slow down. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then he heard it again, a faint, mournful cry carrying through the darkness. Mike pulled over, killing the engine but leaving his headlights on. The sound came again, clearer this time, a whimper that spoke of pain and desperation. "Dispatch, this is Officer Thompson," he spoke into his radio. "I'm checking out a possible distressed animal situation at Johnson Creek Bridge." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Officer Thompson. Do you need animal control?" Mike hesitated, then replied, "Stand by. Let me assess the situation first." Grabbing his flashlight, Mike stepped out into the crisp October air. Fallen leaves crunched beneath his boots as he made his way toward the bridge. The crying grew louder, echoing off the concrete walls. It reminded him of the way Rex would whimper when he was in pain during his final days, and Mike's heart clenched at the memory. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the steep embankment leading down to the creek bed. The water was low this time of year, exposing more of the bridge's support structure. As Mike carefully picked his way down the slope, the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves filled his nostrils. "Hello," he called out softly, not wanting to startle whatever was making the sound. "It's okay, I'm here to help." A growl emerged from the shadows, low and warning. Mike froze, his flashlight beam catching a pair of eyes reflecting back at him. As he adjusted the light, the scene before him made his breath catch in his throat. A large German Shepherd mix lay curled in a hollow beneath the bridge's foundation, her fur matted with mud and what appeared to be blood. But it wasn't just a dog. As Mike's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw why she was there. Tucked against her belly, squirming and mewling, were 5 tiny puppies, their eyes not yet open to the world. "Oh, sweetheart," Mike breathed, his voice thick with emotion. The mother dog's eyes never left him, but her tail gave a slight wag, as if something in his tone had reached her. She reminded him so much of Rex, the same intelligent eyes, the same protective instinct. Mike could see she was injured, a deep gash visible on her side, but she had positioned herself so that her puppies could still nurse, putting their needs before her own pain. The sight brought tears to his eyes as he thought about the countless times Rex had pushed through his own discomfort during his illness, determined to stay by Mike's side until the very end. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar he'd been saving for his break. The mother dog's ears perked up at the sound of the wrapper, but she didn't move from her puppies. "That's right, girl. I'm not going to hurt you," Mike said, breaking off a small piece and gently tossing it within her reach. She sniffed it cautiously before accepting the offering, her hunger apparently overcoming her weariness. Mike keyed his radio again, speaking quietly to avoid startling the small family. "Dispatch, I'm going to need animal control and a vet if we can get one. We've got an injured mother dog with newborn puppies under the bridge. She's hurt pretty bad, but she's alert and responsive." "Copy that. Cedar Grove Animal Hospital has an emergency vet on call. I'll contact them now." As Mike waited for help to arrive, he continued talking softly to the mother dog, earning more tail wags and eventually a gentle whine that seemed more like a greeting than a warning. He noticed a thin collar buried in her matted fur but no tags. Someone had owned her once, but here she was, injured and alone, fighting to keep her babies alive. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the quiet of the night. Mike saw flashlights bobbing at the top of the embankment and called out to guide the rescue team to his location. The mother dog tensed at the new voices, but Mike's continued presence seemed to reassure her. Dr. Sarah Chun from Cedar Grove Animal Hospital arrived with her team, medical kit in hand. She crouched beside Mike, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. "Good thing you found them," she said quietly. "That wound is infected. She's burning up with fever, but she's still nursing those puppies. That's one brave mama." As the rescue team prepared to carefully move the small family, Mike found himself making a silent promise. He couldn't save Rex, couldn't stop the cancer that took his partner away, but he could make sure this mother dog and her puppies got a fighting chance. Looking into her trusting eyes, he saw something that had been missing from his life since Rex's death: hope. The mother dog allowed them to lift her and her puppies onto a stretcher, her eyes never leaving Mike's face. One of her paws reached out and touched his arm, almost like a thank you. Mike swallowed hard against the lump in his throat, knowing that this autumn night under Johnson Creek Bridge was just the beginning of their story. Above them, the harvest moon continued its journey across the star-filled sky, its light now falling on the empty hollow where a mother's love had kept 5 tiny lives safe against all odds. The night air carried the promise of change, of healing, and of second chances, for both a broken-hearted police officer and a brave dog who refused to give up. The fluorescent lights of Cedar Grove Animal Hospital cast harsh shadows across the waiting room as Mike paced back and forth, his boots squeaking against the freshly mopped floor. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift to the swinging doors where Dr. Chun and her team had disappeared with the mother dog and her puppies 30 minutes ago. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second feeling like an eternity. Mike's mind wandered to the last time he'd spent hours in a veterinary hospital just 3 months ago. That night, he'd sat in a similar waiting room praying for different news about Rex. The memory of his partner's final moments hit him like a physical blow, Rex's head in his lap, those loyal eyes fixed on him until the very end. Mike shook his head, trying to dispel the image. This time would be different. It had to be. The doors finally swung open, and Dr. Chun emerged, her scrub top spotted with blood. Mike's heart dropped, but she gave him a tired smile. "She's a fighter," she said, gesturing for him to follow her. "The puppies are all stable, but Mom's got a nasty infection from that wound. Looks like she was attacked by another animal, probably while trying to protect her babies." They walked down a quiet hallway to a treatment room where the mother dog lay on a padded table and 4-line running into her front leg. Her matted fur had been cleaned and shaved around the wound, revealing the full extent of the injury. Despite the pain she must have been feeling, her eyes brightened when she saw Mike, and her tail thumped weakly against the table. "Hey there, brave girl," Mike said softly, approaching slowly. He noticed her puppies nestled in a heated incubator nearby, all 5 of them sleeping peacefully. "How are they doing?" "They're about 2 weeks old," Dr. Chun explained, checking the mothers for. "A little undernourished, but they should be fine. She's been keeping them alive through sheer willpower. That wound is at least a week old, but she never left them to seek help. She's been lying there, slowly getting sicker, putting every bit of energy into keeping those puppies fed." Mike's throat tightened as he gently stroked the mother dog's clean fur. She leaned into his touch, a small whimper escaping her. It was the same sound Rex used to make when seeking comfort during his chemotherapy treatments. "What are her chances?" he asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Chun's face grew serious. "The next 24 hours will be critical. The infection's in her bloodstream. We're giving her strong antibiotics, but she's very weak. She's used up every reserve she had protecting those puppies." As if understanding they were talking about her babies, the mother dog tried to lift her head, looking anxiously toward the incubator. "Easy, girl," Mike soothed, his hand moving to scratch behind her ears. "They're safe. You did good." Dr. Chun checked the dog's temperature and frowned. "We need to keep her calm. The stress isn't helping her condition." She paused, studying Mike's face. "Would you mind staying with her for a while? She seems to trust you." Mike nodded immediately, pulling up a chair beside the table. "I've got nowhere else to be." It wasn't strictly true, his shift had ended hours ago, but he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone. He made that promise under the bridge, and he intended to keep it. As the night wore on, Mike talked softly to the mother dog, telling her about Rex, about their years together on the force, about the emptiness that had followed his loss. She listened with those intelligent eyes, occasionally reaching out to lick his hand when his voice grew thick with emotion. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, one of the puppies began to cry. The mother dog immediately tensed, trying to get up despite her weakness. "No, stay," Mike said gently, standing to check on the tiny pup. Following Dr. Chun's earlier instructions, he carefully lifted the whimpering bundle and brought it to its mother. The transformation in the mother dog was immediate. Despite her pain and exhaustion, her whole focus shifted to her puppy, gently nuzzling it as it found its way to nurse. Mike watched the scene with a mix of awe and heartache, remembering how Rex had maintained his protective instincts until his final day, always checking on Mike even when the cancer had left him barely able to stand. "You know," Mike said quietly, "Rex would have loved you. He had that same heart, always putting others first." The mother dog looked up at him, and in that moment, Mike saw something that made his chest ache. It wasn't just her physical resemblance to Rex, but something deeper, that unconditional love that transcended pain and fear. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Chun returned to check on her patient. The mother dog's fever had spiked during the night, her breathing becoming more labored as the vet administered more medication. Mike found himself making another silent promise. "Don't you give up," he whispered to the dog. "Those puppies need you, and maybe I need you too." The mother dog's tail thumped once, her eyes never leaving Mike's face. In that moment, he realized something that both terrified and comforted him. He was already falling in love with this brave soul who reminded him so much of his lost partner. Outside the hospital windows, the sun rose over Cedar Grove, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The mother dog had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her puppies safely back in their incubator. Mike sat vigil, his hand resting gently on her side, feeling each breath she took. He thought about the brutal truth of what she'd endured, the attack, the pain, the lonely days under that bridge, all while never wavering in her devotion to her puppies. As morning shift workers began arriving at the hospital, Mike knew he should go home and get some rest before his next shift. But looking at the sleeping dog, remembering how he left Rex alone that last night at the vet's, he couldn't bring himself to move. Sometimes, he realized, healing comes not just to those we save, but to those who do the saving. And right now, in this quiet morning hour, Mike wasn't sure which one of them was which. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Cedar Grove Animal Hospital, but inside Treatment Room 3, the atmosphere remained tense. Dr. Chun's face was drawn with concern as she examined the latest blood work results. The mother dog's condition had deteriorated rapidly over the past few hours, her fever climbing despite the aggressive antibiotics, the infection spreading faster than we anticipated, she told Mike, who hadn't left the dog's side except for brief breaks. Her body's too weak to fight it effectively. All those days without proper food or care, nursing those puppies, she trailed off, checking the 4-drip that was delivering a steady stream of antibiotics and fluids. Mike's hand never stopped its gentle stroking of the mother dog's head. Her breathing had become shallow, each exhale accompanied by a slight whimper that tore at his heart. The sound transported him back to Rex's final battle, the way his partner had struggled to breathe near the end. But this time, there were 5 tiny lives depending on their mother's survival. The puppies, now settled in their incubator across the room, seemed to sense their mother's distress. Their previously peaceful sleep had given way to restless squeaking and movement. One particularly vocal pup, the runt of the litter with a distinctive white patch on his chest, cried continuously until Dr. Chun carefully brought him to his mother. Her temperature's at 105, Dr. Chun said, watching as the mother dog, despite her weakness, immediately began tending to her crying puppy. We need to bring that fever down. I'm going to try a different antibiotic combination, she hesitated, meeting Mike's eyes. You should prepare yourself. The next few hours will be critical. Mike nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He'd seen that same look in the vet's eyes 3 months ago, right before they told him Rex's cancer had spread to his lungs. The memory of that helplessness threatened to overwhelm him, but the warm weight of the mother dog's head against his hand kept him grounded. Anchored him to the present, Dr. Chun worked quickly, changing out 4 bags and injecting additional medications. The mother dog remained still through it all, her focus solely on her nursing pup. Only her occasional shivers betrayed her deteriorating condition. Mike talked to her softly, words of encouragement mixing with memories of Rex, as if sharing his pain might somehow help bear hers. By midday, news of the bridge rescue had spread through Cedar Grove. Local animal lovers began arriving at the hospital with donations, blankets, puppy formula, even cash to help with the mounting medical bills. Each visitor wanted to know how the brave mother dog was doing, their faces falling at Dr. Chun's cautiously worded updates. She needs a name, one of the vet techs said during a brief check of the puppy's vital signs. We can't just keep calling her the mother dog. Mike looked at the dog's face, seeing the same unwavering determination he'd witnessed under the bridge. Despite her pain and fever, she never once snapped or growled, maintaining a gentle patience with everyone who approached her puppies. Grace, he said finally. Her name is Grace. The afternoon brought a new crisis. Grace's temperature spiked to 106, and she began having small seizures. Dr. Chun moved quickly, applying ice packs and administering anti-seizure medication. Mike felt utterly helpless, watching Grace's body tremble and jerk, remembering how Rex had suffered through similar episodes near the end. Come on, Grace, he whispered, his voice breaking. Fight this. Your puppies need you. I need you. The words surprised him, but he knew they were true. Somehow, in less than 24 hours, this brave dog had worked her way into his heart, filling a void he thought would remain empty forever. The seizures finally subsided, leaving Grace exhausted but alive. Her puppies, perhaps sensing their mother's struggle, cried more frequently now. The vet techs began supplementing their feeding with formula, knowing Grace's milk production would be affected by her condition. Each time a puppy was brought to her, Grace would rally, summoning energy she couldn't spare to check on her baby. As evening approached, Dr. Chun called in a specialist from the nearby city hospital. Dr. Marcus arrived with additional medication options and experience with severe infection cases. The two vets worked together, adjusting treatments and monitoring Grace's responses. Mike stayed through it all, his shift forgotten. His world narrowed to the rise and fall of Grace's chest and the steady beep of her heart monitor. Around midnight, something changed. Grace's breathing became more labored, and her heart rate began to climb. The monitors beeped urgently as her oxygen levels dropped. Dr. Chun and Dr. Marcus rushed in, quickly assessing the situation. Her lung function is compromised, Dr. Marcus said grimly. The infection's causing fluid buildup. They worked swiftly, inserting a chest tube to drain the fluid and administering oxygen through a mask. Grace remained eerily still through the procedure, her eyes fixed on Mike as if drawing strength from his presence. He talked to her continuously, promising her everything would be okay, even as his own heart raced with fear. The night seemed endless, marked by moments of crisis followed by periods of tense waiting. The puppies were moved to a separate room to protect them from the stress of seeing their mother's distress, but their absence seemed to agitate Grace more than help her. Finally, Dr. Chun allowed the runt, whom the staff had started calling Hope, to return to his mother's side. As dawn approached once again, Grace's vital signs began to stabilize. Her fever dropped slightly, and her breathing eased. Dr. Chun's exhausted face showed the first real smile in hours. "She's turning a corner," she said, reviewing the latest readings. "The new antibiotics are finally taking effect." Mike felt tears of relief sliding down his cheeks as he gently hugged Grace's neck. She responded with a weak tail wag and a soft lick to his hand. In that moment, he realized that while he couldn't save Rex, maybe he had been given a second chance to save Grace. And maybe, in some way he couldn't quite explain, Grace was saving him too. Outside, the sun began to rise over Cedar Grove, its golden light finding its way through the hospital windows. Grace had survived the night, defying the odds just as she had beneath that bridge. As Mike watched her finally drift into a peaceful sleep, Hope curled securely against her side. He knew that their story was far from over. Like the dawn breaking outside, this was just the beginning of a new day, a new chance, and perhaps a new family. The story of Grace and her puppies spread through Cedar Grove like wildfire. By the end of the week, the local news station had picked up the tale, running a feature about the brave mother dog found under Johnson Creek Bridge and a police officer who refused to leave her side. The hospital's waiting room began filling with visitors bearing gifts and donations, their faces lighting up at each positive update on Grace's condition. Dr. Chin had to establish viewing hours to manage the steady stream of well-wishers. Local schoolchildren arrived with handmade get-well cards, their colorful drawings of Grace and her puppies now decorating the hospital walls. The oldest puppy, Hope, had become a particular favorite among visitors, his white chest patch making him instantly recognizable among his siblings. Mike split his time between his shifts in the hospital, catching sleep when he could. Grace's condition improved steadily under Dr. Chin's care, though the road to recovery would be long. The infection had taken a toll on her body, leaving her weak but determined. Each day brought small victories, her first wobbly step since the rescue, her increasing appetite, the growing strength in her tail wags when Mike arrived. The local pet supply store organized a donation drive, collecting essential items for Grace and her puppies. The response overwhelmed the store owner, Martha, who had to dedicate an entire storage room to the incoming supplies. "I've never seen anything like it," she told Mike one morning as he helped unload another batch of donations. "That dog has touched something in people's hearts." Cedar Grove's small newspaper ran a front-page story titled "Bridge of Hope, A Mother's Love Unites a Community." The article detailed not just Grace's rescue and recovery but the outpouring of support that followed. The reporter interviewed Mike, capturing the moment Grace first allowed him to handle her puppies, a sign of absolute trust that brought tears to the veteran officer's eyes. As Grace grew stronger, Dr. Chin began allowing her more time with her puppies. The incubator was moved permanently into her room, and she watched with proud attention as her babies grew more active each day. The staff had named the remaining 4 puppies Faith, Joy, Lucky, and Spirit, but Hope remained everyone's favorite, his personality as bright as his distinctive marking. The police department showed their support in their own way. Mike's fellow officers covered his shifts without complaint when he needed to be at the hospital, and the chief himself visited several times, always bringing treats that Grace accepted with gentle politeness. "She's got better manners than half my force," the chief joked, but his eyes were serious when he added, "She's helping heal more than just herself." Local businesses joined the effort to help. The groomer offered free services once Grace was well enough. The pet photographer volunteered a free session to document the puppy's growth, and the trainer promised behavioral classes when the time came. The community's generosity touched Mike deeply, reminding him of the support he'd received after losing Rex. 1 month after the rescue, Dr. Chin organized a small celebration in the hospital's reception area. Grace, now strong enough to walk on her own, made her first public appearance. Her coat had regained its shine, and though the scar on her side would always remain, it seemed more like a badge of honor than a wound. The puppies, too chubby and energetic to be contained, tumbled around their mother's feet as cameras flashed and children squealed with delight. Mike watched from the sidelines, his heart full. Grace had changed something in Cedar Grove, awakening a spirit of compassion that rippled through the community. The shelter reported a surge in adoptions, with families inspired by Grace's story opening their homes to other animals in need. The hospital's emergency medical fund, usually struggling to stay solvent, now had enough donations to help countless other pets in crisis. During quiet moments between visitors, Mike would sit with Grace and her puppies, marveling at their progress. Hope, true to his name, always climbed into Mike's lap first, his little tail wagging with uncontained joy. Grace would watch them with knowing eyes, her head resting on Mike's knee in a gesture that reminded him so much of Rex's, and it made his chest ache. But the pain was different now, softer, more like remembrance than grief. The mayor visited one afternoon, presenting Grace with a special collar adorned with a tag declaring her an honorary member of Cedar Grove's K-9 unit. The gesture nearly undid Mike's professional composure, especially when Grace sat perfectly still, her head held high as if understanding. The honor being bestowed upon her, the photo of that moment, Grace dignified despite Hope climbing over her back and the other puppies tangling around her feet, became the hospital's most shared social media post. Dr. Chin began discussing future plans as Grace's recovery progressed. The puppies would soon be old enough for adoption, and applications had already started pouring in. "They'll all find wonderful homes," she assured Mike, who found himself growing increasingly attached to the little family. Grace deserves a forever home where she'll be cherished. The word stirred something in Mike's heart, a possibility he'd been afraid to consider since losing Rex. He'd convinced himself he wasn't ready for another dog, but watching Grace with her puppies, seeing her gentle strength and unwavering love, he realized that sometimes healing comes in unexpected forms. As the sun set on another day at Cedar Grove Animal Hospital, Mike sat in his usual spot beside Grace's bed. Hope was asleep in his lap, while the other puppies dozed in a pile nearby. Grace looked at him with those soulful eyes that seemed to see right through to his heart, and he knew what he had to do. "What do you think, girl?" he asked softly, scratching behind her ears just the way she liked. "Ready for a new adventure?" Grace's tail thumped against the bed, and she lifted her head to gently touch her nose to his hand, the same gesture of trust she'd shown that first night under the bridge. Outside, the streets of Cedar Grove hummed with life, its people forever changed by the story of a mother's love and a community's compassion. Inside the hospital room, a broken-hearted police officer and a brave dog who had lost everything found in each other the beginning of something new, a second chance at family wrapped in the promise of tomorrow's dawn. As Grace continued her recovery at Cedar Grove Animal Hospital, Police Chief Roberts called Mike into his office one morning. The small room was cluttered with commendations and photos from his 30 years on the force, but today his usually cheerful face was serious. "We got a tip about Grace," he said, gesturing for Mike to sit down. "Someone recognized her from the news coverage." Mike's heart tightened as the chief pulled out a file. Inside were photos of a rundown property on the outskirts of town, known locally as the Old Miller Farm. "Animal Control's been trying to bust this place for months," the chief explained. "Illegal breeding operation. The owner, James Wilson, keeps moving around, staying one step ahead of us." The photo showed makeshift kennels and dogs in various states of neglect. Mike's hands clenched into fists as he recognized the setting. One photo showed a German Shepherd mix that could have been Grace's twin, taken months earlier. "The witness says she was one of Wilson's breeding dogs," the chief continued. "Apparently escaped during a raid attempt last month." "Makes sense." That's when they found the place abandoned. Mike thought about Grace, about her desperate days under the bridge, about her unwavering devotion to her puppies despite her injuries. The idea that someone had treated her as nothing more than breeding stock made his blood boil. "Do we know where Wilson is now?" Chief Roberts nodded grimly. "Got a possible location in X County. I want you to lead the investigation, Thompson. You've got the strongest connection to this case." He paused, studying Mike's face. "Just remember, do this by the book. Don't let it get personal." But it was already personal. As Mike drove to the hospital later that day, his mind raced with the new information. Grace greeted him with her usual gentle enthusiasm. The puppies, now big enough to wobble excitedly around his feet, looked at their healthy, happy faces. It was hard to imagine the darkness they'd been born into. Dr. Chin confirmed what they'd suspected after examining Grace's old records. "She's definitely had multiple litters before this one," she said softly, showing Mike the signs of earlier pregnancies. "Probably started breeding her too young. It's a miracle she stayed so sweet-natured after everything she's been through." The investigation moved quickly. Mike worked with local authorities in both counties, piecing together Wilson's operation. They discovered other escaped dogs, some found homes, others still missing. Each story strengthened Mike's determination to bring the man to justice, not just for Grace but for all the animals who'd suffered at his hands. Meanwhile, Grace's puppies continued to thrive, their personalities emerging more each day. Hope remained the leader, always first to investigate new toys or visitors. Faith inherited her mother's gentle nature, while Joy lived up to her name with boundless enthusiasm. Lucky and Spirit were the adventurous ones, constantly plotting escapes from their play, that their mother watched with patient amusement. The hospital staff had begun processing adoption applications, carefully screening potential families. Dr. Chin insisted on homes within Cedar Grove, wanting to keep the puppies close to their mother and to Mike, though she didn't say this directly. The entire town seemed invested in their future, with regular visitors checking on their progress and bringing toys or treats. One quiet evening, as Mike sat with Grace while the puppies slept, his phone buzzed with a text from Chief Roberts. They had located Wilson's new operation and were planning a raid for the following morning. Mike looked at Grace, who met his eyes with that uncanny understanding she always showed. "We're going to make this right," he promised her softly. The raid went down at dawn. Mike led the team that breached the property, finding more dogs in desperate need of care. Wilson was arrested trying to flee out the back, his protest cut short when Mike read him his rights. In the man's truck, they found documentation of his entire operation, including records of Grace, listed only as breeding female number 7. Back at the hospital, the staff celebrated the news of Wilson's arrest. Grace seemed to sense the shift in energy, her tail wagging as she accepted extra treats and attention. The puppies, now 7 weeks old, turned the celebration into their own private party, racing around the room with typical puppy enthusiasm. Local media covered Wilson's arrest extensively, leading to more tips about similar operations in neighboring counties. The story sparked a regional conversation about illegal breeding and animal welfare. Cedar Grove Shelter began offering workshops on recognizing signs of puppy mills and the importance of adopting from reputable sources. As Mike filed his report on the case, he found himself looking at the before and after photos of Grace. The scared, injured dog from under the bridge had transformed into a confident, loving mother whose story had changed an entire community's perspective on animal welfare. Her journey from victim to survivor had inspired others to take action, to speak up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Dune approached Mike one afternoon as he played with the puppies in the hospital's small garden. Grace lounged nearby in the sun, contentedly watching her babies explore. "The adoption interviews are going well," she said, sitting beside him. "All the families check out. They're good people, committed to giving these puppies the life they deserve." Mike nodded, trying to ignore the twinge in his heart at the thought of the puppies leaving. He'd known this day was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. Hope, as if sensing his mood, climbed into his lap and licked his face, causing Grace to wag her tail in approval. "You know," Dr. Chin continued carefully, "we haven't discussed Grace's future placement yet." She watched Mike's face as she spoke. "She's fully recovered now, ready for a permanent home, someone who understands her history, who can help her continue to heal and thrive." Mike looked at Grace, who gazed back with those soulful eyes that had captured his heart that first night under the bridge. In them, he saw not just the pain of her past, but the promise of her future. She was no longer just a victim of Wilson's cruelty. She was a survivor, a mother, a symbol of hope for an entire community. As the sun began to set over Cedar Grove, casting long shadows across the hospital garden, Mike realized that sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Wilson would face punishment for his crimes, but Grace's true victory lay in the lives she touched, the hearts she'd healed, and the change she'd inspired. She had transformed from a number in a breeder's ledger to a beloved member of a community that would never let her be forgotten or unloved again. The morning of the adoption ceremony dawned bright and clear over Cedar Grove. The animal hospital's garden had been transformed with ribbons and balloons, chairs arranged in neat rows facing a small podium. Each of Grace's puppies wore a specially made blue collar, a gift from Martha's pet supply store, with their names engraved on silver tags. Mike stood at the back of the gathering crowd, watching Grace interact with her now-grown puppies. At 12 weeks old, they were energetic bundles of fur and personality, yet they still looked to their mother for guidance. Grace moved among them with patience, occasionally correcting an overly excited pup with a gentle nudge. The chosen families arrived one by one, each greeted with enthusiastic tail wags from their soon-to-be puppies. Faith's new family included 2 young girls who had visited the hospital every week since the rescue. Joy was going home with a retired couple who had lost their elderly dog last year. Lucky and Spirit were being adopted by neighboring families who promised plenty of playdates. While Hope, Mike's hand instinctively went to his pocket, feeling the adoption papers he'd signed yesterday after weeks of soul-searching. And after long talks with Dr. Chin, he made his decision. Grace was coming home with him, and Hope, the brave little pup with the white chest patch who'd stolen everyone's hearts, would be joining them. Dr. Chin stepped up to the podium, her face beaming as she addressed the gathered crowd. 3 months ago, a brave mother dog was found under Johnson Creek Bridge, fighting for her life and protecting her newborn puppies. Today, we celebrate not just their survival but the extraordinary journey that brought us all together. The ceremony proceeded with each family coming forward to officially receive their puppy. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden as the children hugged their new friends, and the puppies covered their faces with kisses. Grace watched it all with dignified pride, occasionally glancing at Mike as if seeking reassurance. When it was Mike's turn, he stepped forward with Grace by his side. "Officer Thompson," Dr. Chin announced, her voice thick with emotion. "You found Grace that night, and you never left her side. Today, you're giving her and Hope something she fought so hard to give her puppies, a forever home." Hope bounded into Mike's arms while Grace pressed against his leg, her tail wagging gently. The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. The local newspaper photographer captured the moment, Mike kneeling between Grace and Hope, all 3 looking at each other with unmistakable love. After the ceremony, as the families began to disperse with their new puppies, Chief Roberts approached Mike. "Wilson's trial is next week," he said quietly. "The evidence is solid. He's looking at serious time." Mike nodded, his hand resting on Grace's head. The man who had caused her so much pain would face justice, but Grace's legacy would be one of love, not vengeance. That evening, Mike drove home with Grace and Hope in the back seat of his patrol car. The house seemed different somehow, warmer, as if it had been waiting for them. He'd spent the past week preparing, setting up beds, buying toys, puppy-proofing the backyard. Now, watching Grace explore her new home with calm curiosity while Hope bounced excitedly from room to room, he knew he'd made the right decision. In the living room, Mike had created a special place of honor. Next to Rex's old collar and badge, he set a shadow box containing the newspaper clipping about Grace's rescue, her honorary K9 unit tag, and a photo of all 5 puppies. It was a testament to the past and a celebration of the future, bridges between loss and healing. As night fell, Grace and Hope settled onto their new beds in the living room. Mike sat on the floor between them, overwhelmed by the feeling of rightness that filled his heart. "Welcome home," he whispered, receiving gentle licks from both dogs in response. The next morning marked the beginning of their new routine. Mike took them both to work, where Grace's calm presence and Hope's playful energy quickly made them favorites at the station. During quiet moments on patrol, Mike would glance in his rearview mirror, seeing Grace's dignified profile where Rex once sat, while Hope sprawled happily beside her. Word spread quickly about Grace's new role. Schools invited them for presentations about animal welfare, using Grace's story to teach children about compassion and resilience. The local shelter asked them to help socialize nervous dogs, finding that Grace had a special talent for calming anxious animals. Even the hospital requested regular visits, discovering that patients responded powerfully to Grace's gentle spirit. 6 months after the adoption, Cedar Grove hosted its first annual Bridge of Hope Pet Adoption Festival. The event, held near Johnson Creek Bridge, brought together shelters, rescue organizations, and animal lovers from across the region. Grace and Hope served as the unofficial mascots, their story inspiring countless adoptions. During the festival, Mike received updates about the other puppies. Faith had become a reading therapy dog at the local library. Joy competed in agility trials, her enthusiasm winning hearts and ribbons. Lucky and Spirit were indeed inseparable, their families often joking that the puppies had adopted them rather than the other way around. As the sun set over the bridge where their story began, Mike watched Grace and Hope play with a group of children near the festival's main stage. Grace moved with the same patience that had captured his heart that first night, while Hope bounded about with infectious enthusiasm. Looking at them, Mike thought about the mysterious ways life works, how loss leads to love, how endings become beginnings. Later that night, at home, Mike sat on his porch with Grace and Hope beside him. The stars twinkled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed a mother's desperate courage beneath a bridge not so long ago. Grace rested her head on his knee, her eyes full of trust and contentment, while Hope sprawled across his feet, snoring softly. "Rex would be proud," Mike said quietly, scratching behind Grace's ears. "He always believed in second chances." Grace's tail thumped against the porch boards in response, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across Cedar Grove, a reminder that all journeys, even the hardest ones, can lead us home. The bridge still stood, a silent guardian over Johnson Creek, but it was no longer just a landmark. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, love can light the way forward. And in a home not far from that bridge, a police officer and 2 dogs who had lost everything found, in each other, the family they were always meant to be.